In 1921, archaeologists in Denmark opened a burial mound that had been sealed for more than 3,000 years. They expected bones, maybe fragments of tools, maybe dust. What they did not expect was to come face to face with a teenage girl who felt unsettlingly close to modern. She had been placed inside a hollowed oak tree trunk turned into a coffin and sealed beneath a massive earthen mound near the village of Ekved. When the lid was lifted, time seemed to fold in on itself. Her body had not survived completely, but parts of her had. Her hair, her nails, her teeth, even traces of skin and soft tissue, enough to remind everybody in the room that this was not a legend or a myth. This was a real person. She lived around 1370 BC during the Nordic Bronze Age. That makes her roughly 3,400 years old. And yet, what stunned archaeologists most was not just her preservation, it was how carefully she had been dressed. This was not a simple burial. She wore a fitted wool blouse and a short corded skirt made from twisted strands of wool. Around her waist was a belt with a large bronze disc, polished and deliberate, placed at the center of her body. To modern eyes, the outfit almost looked fashionable. Outfit looked minimal, but it also looked intentional. Something that would not look out of place at a music festival or a gathering today. For decades, people would look at reconstructions of her clothing and say the same thing. She does not look ancient, she looks current. But clothing was only the beginning of her story. As archaeologists examined the coffin more closely, they realized this burial had layers. Near her feet were the cremated remains of a small child, possibly around 6 years old. The relationship between them is still unknown. A sibling, a companion, a ritual offering, no one could say for sure. There was a small birch bark container placed beside her. Inside were traces of a fermented drink made from wheat, honey, and wild berries, essentially a Bronze Age beer. This was not everyday food. This was ceremonial, something prepared for an important moment. Flower pollen found inside the coffin suggested she was buried in summer. This was not a rushed burial. It was planned, symbolic, and thought out. From the beginning, archaeologists believed she must have been somebody important. But for a long time, that importance was a mystery. Then, nearly a century after her discovery, science caught up. Researchers began analyzing isotopes in her teeth, hair, and clothing. These isotopes act like geological fingerprints. Different regions leave different chemical signatures in the body depending on the water you drink and the land you live on. And what they found changed everything. The Ekved girl was not local to the area where she was buried. In fact, the isotopes suggested she spent most of her life hundreds of miles away, possibly in what is now southern Germany. Even more surprising, the analysis of her hair showed she moved back and forth between regions multiple times in the last 2 years of her life. This was not a static life in a small village. This was a teenager who traveled long distances during the Bronze Age. There wasn't any roads or maps like we have today, just trade routes, alliances, and human connections stretching across Europe. Suddenly, the burial made more sense. The clothing was not just fashion, it was identity. The bronze belt disc may have symbolized the sun, a powerful image in Nordic Bronze Age belief systems. Some researchers think she may have played a role in rituals connected to sun worship, fertility, or seasonal cycles. Others believe she may have been part of a political alliance, possibly married or promised into another community to strengthen ties between distant regions. In the Bronze Age, movement often meant meaning. People did not travel without reason, and young women especially were often central to those reasons. She may have been a messenger between worlds, or a bride, or a ceremonial figure whose presence carried spiritual weight, or even all three. What we do know is this: her life involved motion, her death involved care. The oak coffin itself was an extraordinary choice. Oak trees were sacred in many ancient cultures. They're strong and long-lasting, symbolic of endurance. To hollow one out by hand and shape it into a coffin would have taken immense effort. That effort was intentional. The mound built above her was large and visible, designed to last, designed to be seen. This was someone meant to be remembered, and yet, after a few generations, her name was lost. Her voice disappeared. Her story went silent for over 3,000 years, until 1921. What makes the Eggbet girl so compelling today is not just how well she was preserved, it's how familiar she feels. She was young, somewhere between 16 and 18 years old, an age filled with change, uncertainty, possibility, and an age where identity matters deeply. She wore clothing that expressed who she was. She moved through a world larger than her birthplace. She belonged to something bigger than herself. And she died young. There are no signs of violence on what remains of her body, no clear cause of death. It could have been illness, infection, something sudden, or even something ordinary by ancient standards. What mattered most to the people who buried her was not how she died, but how she was honored. They dressed her carefully. They placed meaningful objects beside her. They sealed her in wood, earth, and memory. For modern audiences, the image of the dead girl often goes viral because of how unexpected it is. People see her reconstructed outfit and think it feels modern, almost rebellious, almost bold. But that reaction says more about us than it does about her. We tend to imagine the ancient world as dull, colorless, primitive. We forget that people have always cared about appearance, symbolism, and self expression. The Bronze Age was not just tools and weapons, it was art, craftsmanship, jewelry, ritual, belief. The corded skirt she wore took time to make. It took skill and knowledge passed down through generations. The bronze disc required access to metal, trade networks, and specialized craftsmanship. Nothing about her burial was accidental. Even today, scientists continue to debate details of her life. Where exactly did she come from? Why did she travel so much? What role did she play in her society? And that uncertainty is part of what makes her human. She is not a solved equation. She is a person reconstructed through fragments, a reminder that history is not just about kings and battles, it's about people whose lives matter deeply to the people around them. When you stand in front of her exhibit today, you aren't just looking at the past. You are standing inches away from a life that once moved, breathed, laughed, and worried. Someone who stood under the same sun as us. Someone who wore clothes that felt right to her. Someone whose world was different but not alien. And perhaps that's why this girl continues to capture attention over 100 years after her discovery. She reminds us that humanity does not suddenly begin in the modern age. It has always been here. Humans always been curious, creative, mobile, and meaning driven. A girl buried 34 centuries ago is still turning heads today, not because she was preserved, but because she was understood.